So we're talking initially about vacation. That's not really the main focus of where we're headed this morning, but I'm sure any of us, if we're offered vacation, would say, oh yes, I'll take it, but by the time it's over, sometimes we're not sure if it's a blessing or a burden. How was our vacation? Well, it was good. There were good moments. There were frustrating moments. There were times when we're trying to figure out, okay, what do people really want to do? Because sometimes in our family, if nobody takes charge, nothing happens. And, people just kind of sit around doing what they would do, and the hours pass, and then suddenly it's evening, and it's like, okay, there's a day. I don't get angsty about that when that happens, as you can tell. No, I do a little bit sometimes, and then my angst can put a damp blanket over everything, and I share this for two reasons. One is because obviously I've been living it this past week, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and there wasn't much ugly, a lot of good. But it got me thinking a little bit about the purpose, the benefit, what are the ideals, how would a vacation be well spent? And it got me thinking about God's plan and purpose for just in all of creation, something that the scriptures call Sabbath. And the title in the bulletin is The Gift and Goal of Sabbath. You may look at that and say, I never really thought of it as a gift. I'm not sure that there are any goals. It's just one of the commandments, isn't it? Something that we're supposed to obey and do. So perhaps we might ask the question of the Sabbath, is it blessing or burden? We look in the scriptures, we start with the commandment, and we find this in the list of the 10 commandments back in Exodus chapter 20. It's one of the big 10. Give me a moment to find it. Exodus chapter 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your manservant or maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Certainly the longest explanation attached to any of the 10 commandments. But it's more than simply a commandment. We can look at it and see a pattern. First of all, in the commandment itself, attached to it, it says the part of the rationale for it, or part of the motivation for it perhaps, is to say, well, look at the pattern of creation. Look at how in the creation story God created this universe and then took his rest. And that was a pattern that God designed in the universe and that God intended for man to follow. But it's not only there, we see it in just the pattern of the earth's spinning that gives us day and night. That God created into this world the time for rest and the time for awake. We find it in so many of the other laws and practices in the Old Testament. We talk about a time for rest. And right from the very beginning, God connected this idea of keeping the Sabbath with rest. The rationale given is God created, God worked, and then he rested. Therefore, you should remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. So somehow the Sabbath and rest are very closely intertwined. I mentioned day and night. There's another Sabbath in the Old Testament for farmers growing crops. Every 7 years, the people of Israel were to give their ground rest. And so there was this Sabbath year, every 7th year. There was also a special year after 7 sevens of Sabbaths. year of Jubilee, so it was every 50 years. After you had the 7-7, then you had this special year. The 50th year was a time for canceling debts. And then we begin to read in Scripture using this same language of Sabbath, of Jubilee, of rest, to talk about eternity and an eternal rest. An eternal Sabbath rest that God promises to the people of God is waiting for us. And we start to put all of this picture together, and perhaps we're rethinking a little bit. Maybe this isn't just a burden that God has placed on us. Now, the religious leaders in Jesus' day didn't understand it in the way that Jesus then came to present it to us. They saw the law. And they saw the commandment not to work, and boy, they were determined to keep that commandment as perfectly as they could, and they were determined to be the police for everyone else in keeping that commandment. And so that became the most important thing of keeping the Sabbath. And every imaginable form of work was put under the microscope and dissected and taken apart, and all of these things were then turned into minute principles of law that were placed on men's shoulders, as Jesus said. And so the commandment not to work, they said, well, working, farming, you can't make a furrow, and to drag a chair across a dirt floor is making a furrow in the dust, so you can't move a chair in your house, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. And it became this heavy burden that in turn was supposed to be a reflection of God, and it was so far from God's heart in all of this. And so Jesus came along and got himself in a lot of trouble with the religious leaders of his day, because he would be walking along, and his disciples would pick some corn on the Sabbath, some grain from the fields nearby as they're walking, and the religious leaders said they were working. And Jesus told them the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Very important distinction there. The Sabbath was made for man's benefit. Man was not created to serve the Sabbath. Multiple times when someone came to Jesus on the Sabbath with a physical infirmity, and Jesus healed on the Sabbath, and he was criticized for working on the Sabbath. Jesus said, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Which of you, if you have an ox or a donkey and he stumbles into a ditch on the Sabbath, are not going to pull him out? We read more in the New Testament. In the letters of Paul, talks about in the early church how some people were really getting bent out of shape about this, because the Sabbath was the 7th day of the week, and as we count days, that would put it on Saturday, and yet some things happened to make Sunday particularly special, the first day of the week, particularly special in the life of the church. And almost immediately we begin to read of the church after the resurrection of Christ and after Pentecost, the church gathering on the first day of the week. And for centuries, that has been the Christian Sabbath, if you will. But even in Bible times, there were some disputes about days of the week, and Paul wrote very clearly in his letters that some of you think that one day is more important, more sacred than another, and others of you esteem every day the same. What's the answer? Let each person be fully persuaded in his own heart and mind. That was the answer. Another place, in Colossians chapter 2, verses 16 and 17, it talks about don't pass a judgment on someone else in terms of how they observe the Sabbath. It's not intended, the New Testament says, to be this burden placed on us. It is a gift of God. for us. It's a day of rest. A day to recharge, perhaps. Other words like renewal, recreation, reconnecting, perhaps refocus, refresh, resetting. I think of what happens with a good night's sleep. Wake up in the morning. Body's refreshed. Mind is refreshed. The God who created us knows how important it is for us to take some time. I think it's less important exactly how that happens in our lives, and the circumstances of our lives today may be different than the early church time. I mean, they certainly didn't have Sundays off. That wasn't the Roman Empire saying, okay, we'll give all you Christians a Sunday off from work. They had to get kind of creative in their coming together to worship. Sometimes they gathered in the evening after work. One time Paul preached all night. A fellow fell asleep and fell out of an upstairs window, and that's another story. Sometimes we get hung up over the rules and over that aspect of it. But we forget to reflect on what God really designed, what the goal was of this time. A time for us to be able to give rest, to give care to body, mind, soul, and spirit. You think about the field that was given rest every 7 years. We now know there's some science of agriculture that's a good thing for a field. And it's going to be more productive after it's been given some rest and a chance to turn over and to plow it up and to put nutrients back into the soil so it's not used up. And sometimes it's not just a matter of doing nothing. In some of our understanding of the soil, sometimes even just rotating crops can give the soil the rest and can renew the soil in ways because not every crop takes the same thing out of the soils. And when that crop is tilled under, then sometimes new things can be added to the soil and a different crop grown there. And you think we're that different in terms of our needs? To really be reflective, and what is it that will help us to be more productive? What is it that will help us to be more focused? Not only in our work, but in our relationships and in our pursuit of following Christ. I imagine a parent giving a teenage son or daughter a car. And then watching them not take care of it. Never changing the oil. Never washing the car. Never doing any number of what we would call important routine maintenance. And you imagine the feeling of a parent and the frustration of, I gave you this and now you're not taking care of it. There's a whole sense of stewardship in what God has given to us of the lives that we have. And it's no guarantee. We know that there are other factors that come into life. There are automobile accidents. There are sicknesses and disease that we have no control over, but there are things we do have control over. And sometimes even when we're facing difficulties in life, it's even more important to take some time for soul care, to take some time to make sure that we're able to refocus, to recharge, and to be in the best, not just physical condition, but the best mental, the best spiritual condition that we can be, to be able to face the challenges of the day-to-day. So what is an ideal vacation? Is it a time just to sleep in all day? Well, it's not just sleep. We've talked about other things that we need, other things that can restore and recreate us, can reconnect with other people. I think one of the keys to vacation is being intentional. That doesn't necessarily mean intense. And there's some of us that can be that way on vacation. Can be, oh, we've got to schedule everything. We've got to get the most out of this. And no, that's not healthy either. To be intentional about what do I need? What do the people around me need? And to do it on purpose. To choose things, to schedule reasonably, but not too much. To think on purpose about what would help us to relax, to rest, to refocus, to reconnect, to refresh. I think the same principle is there for Sabbath. Whenever we're able to take it, however that's able to happen in our lives, to value it, to understand that God gave us this principle for our good. And a part of this principle is not only reconnecting with other people, but it's reconnecting with God. It's resetting ourselves in the same way, perhaps, that a good night's sleep can reset our bodies for the next day. That taking some time to refocus, to focus on God, to focus on other people, some time literally to rest, to be still and know that He is God, to take some time to connect with other people, to take some time to do something different. Something that will energize and not drain. To go for a walk, to spend some time out in nature and in God's world, to let that speak to us. Sometimes to take some time and turn these off and listen for other sounds. Look for other sights. Not be afraid to be quiet for a while. To be comfortable with our own thoughts and questions. To give God space to speak to us in new ways. I believe Sabbath is a gift from God. I believe His goal in Sabbath is ultimately for our good. So whether you're able to take it for a week at a time, and whether the best you can do is a few hours here and there, let's be reminded of the one who made us, the one who knows what we need. Let's be good stewards of our bodies, our minds, our soul, our spirit. Let's invite God into the process of giving ourselves appropriate rest. There's a song, I'm not going to sing it this morning, I'm not going to play it, I'm just going to read a few words in closing. I've shared this before, it's Stephen Curtis Chapman's song, it's called See the Glory. And he starts out talking about, kind of describing himself as kind of this doer, this highly motivated, want to be the best, want to do the best, want to accomplish things. He said, I never did like the word mediocre. I never wanted it to be said of me. Just point me to the top and I'll go over, looking for the very best that could be. So what is this thing I see going on inside of me? When it comes to the grace of God, sometimes it's like I'm playing Game Boy sitting in the middle of the Grand Canyon. It's a little handheld video game, if you didn't know it. Okay? Sometimes it's like I'm eating candy sitting at a gourmet feast. I'm wading in a puddle when I could be swimming in the ocean. Tell me what's the deal with me? Wake up and see the glory. Every star in the sky tells his story, and every breeze is singing his song. All of creation is imploring, come see this grand phenomenon. The wonder of his grace should take my breath away. I miss so many things when I'm content with playing Game Boy in the middle of the Grand Canyon, with eating candy sitting at a gourmet feast, with wading in a puddle when I could be swimming in the ocean. I know the time has come for me to wake up and see the glory. Perhaps that says as much as anything God's heart for Sabbath. God's heart for us to detach from the busyness, from all that would drive us and control us in life, and to help to open our eyes, to help us to see a little bit more of his glory, to experience him in ways that restores our soul, that heals our broken spirit, that strengthens us for the task ahead, that gives us rest, that gives us peace, that helps us to trust more fully in him. I like hearing testimony of people saying, I like to come to church. Not because of numbers, but because it's feeding something in you, because somehow it's restoring you, because you recognize that this is a part. It's not all of it. This is a part of God's design to restore our soul over and over and over again. But don't hear this message as simply being about coming to church. Hear it more broadly of God's purpose, even in our gathering, what that can mean for us. Not a burden, but a blessing. Refocusing, refreshing, sometimes helping us to get a new start when we've lost our way. May God help us to find the other things in life, the other pieces that we need to truly make Sabbath a way of life and following him.